Hello my loves, I'm Fantasims and welcome to my channel. I love turning Sims 4 into a world of fiction and fantasy, and you can find my creations on the Sims 4 gallery. And if you like what you see here, be sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel and hit the bell to be notified about fresh content. In this video, I'll show you how to turn almost any object in Sims 4 into unique fantasy or sci-fi creations. Together we'll make something that looks like custom content without actually being custom content. What I'm about to show you is super easy once you get the hang of it, and it's awesome because you can use this method over and over and get unique results every time. You only need one thing, and that's TwistedMexi's tool mod. If you've never used mods before, I'll quickly show you. First, you want to make sure you're logged out of your Sims 4 game, because if you try and move around folders while you're in the game, it can destroy the game. But before we do that, you want to go into your menu, go to Game Options, under Other, make sure that Enable Custom Content and Mods is checked, and that script mods are allowed. And you want to do that before you log out of your game, so apply the changes, and then exit the game. Okay, now in your search engine, type TwistedMexi tool mod, and all you have to do is click on that. It should show up as one of the top options, and he has all these other mods that you can download and play with, but the one we're using today is his tool mod. So we're going to download this, and he gives you complete instructions on what files you're going to need to download. But you need two main ones, and that's the package file and the script file. So you're just going to download those, and I recommend putting them in a folder on your desktop that's called TwistedMexi or Tool Mod or whatever. And once you've downloaded that, you're going to open up your Documents folder. Then you're going to click on your Electronic Arts folder, The Sims 4, and then scroll down until you see the Mods folder. I've already got mods in here, but basically what you're going to do is you're going to take your folder that you've created with your files for the tool mod, you're just going to drag it into your mods folder, and then close that. And then all you have to do is relaunch Sims 4. Okay, now when you launch the game, you're going to be met with this window that asks you to allow mods, and you're going to check yes. When I'm rotating these objects, I like to use the biggest lot possible, so whether you have access to the 50 by 50 lots or the 64 by 64, you want to have a lot of room to play with because you're going to be spreading objects out. Another important thing is you need to have a sim on the lot, because the TwistedMexi tool mod only works in live mode, so you're going to be switching back and forth between build mode and live mode. So I like to use the 64 by 64 lot because I get visually claustrophobic and I like to have lots of room to move around. Next, you want to make sure that your lot is set to generic. And the reason for that is because you're going to have a lot more access to all the objects, debug objects that I'm about to show you, and you can't find those objects when you're in residential mode. Then we're going to use three different cheats, and if you're not familiar with these, I'll walk you through them. The first one is the Move Objects cheat. So to pull that up, you need to hit Ctrl-Shift-C, and you'll see this text window pops up, and you will type bb.moveObjects_on, and that will allow you to move objects anywhere you want, layer them on top of each other without them getting red and blocking you from being able to place them. The second cheat is bb.showHiddenObjects. And if you notice down here, it'll change. And now you have access to all these objects that are hidden within the game. So for example, you see these bottles here. Those are actually what your Sims will use when they're at the bar creating drinks. It also gives you access to all the potions from Realm of Magic and things like that. The third cheat, which is my favorite, is bb.showLiveEditObjects, and you'll see it'll change again, and now it's including all these different objects that you can find in the world around the lots. Basically, you'll see like trains, trees, rocks, all the different things that you'll see around the lots in the different worlds, and they can be really fun to work with, like bridges, and they work really great with fantasy builds. Okay, now to exit out of this pop-up window, you're just going to hit the escape key. And today I'm going to be working with debug objects from Realm of Magic. I'm going to filter my items by packs, and you can use any pack you want. Here we go. This is the object that we are going to be using in this video. And then the last thing that you want to do as you're preparing is to press the F5 key, and I only just recently learned about this from my good friend Winter's Edge 22. She's awesome. She has incredible gardens that she makes, so be sure to check her out in the gallery. And I'll show you the difference. Now, before you press F5, when you try and move objects around, it gets locked into the intersections of the grid, as you can see here. But when you press the F5 key, all of a sudden, you can move in between the intersections, between the lines, and it gives you a lot more option to where you're going to be placing your objects. Okay, now to get started, I'm later going to turn this object into a fantasy art, but for the purpose for today, we're first going to turn these objects into a wheel. And the reason I like to do that is because when you create a wheel with these objects in tons of different directions, different angles, you can later use those objects for all kinds of different projects. Because we're making a wheel, you want to allow enough room for the object to be rotated. If I were to leave them on ground level here and try to rotate them, some of them would get lost into the floor and sometimes objects can end up disappearing. So we want to elevate the objects so that it allows enough room to rotate it. And I like to rotate them, or elevate them rather, by being right just on the sitting on the top. There's perfect. And that way when you're creating the wheel, you're allowing a lot of room for it to move around. The next thing you want to do is line up 36 of these elevated at this level. And that can become quite tedious. So what I like to do is elevate 5 of them at a time. Like so. Line up 5 of them. Draw a room around it, so I'll just show you an example here because I already have one saved in my library. And then just delete the ceiling, delete the walls, and you can save that as a room. It's a debug object, so you can't just copy and paste. Name it whatever you want and save it. Say you were using this bench. Now if I hold the shift button down, I can duplicate as many as I want. And also I can draw a room around. And I can copy and paste this room by just doing a copy like this. And if you hold the shift key down, you can make as many of these rooms as you want. But because we are using these debug objects, we can't do that. Now if I go into my library, I already have them elevated in a room of 10. I did 10 just to make it easier on myself when placing them. And I'm just going to line up 4 of these, which will make 40, but we actually only need 36 of them. So one more. Okay, and then delete 4. Oops. And then these will be ready to be rotated. But I also like to do an angled version of the wheels that I make because sometimes I like to build against angled walls. I've already pre-made one. Once you've got 36 of them lined up, you're going to go into live mode. And here's where the fun part is, where we get to rotate each object. In order to create a 360-degree circle, we're going to move each of these 36 objects by 10 degrees, except for the last one because it's already in the 360-degree position. So to rotate, just hold down your shift key, click on the object, and there should be a tool button that shows up. Now, if that tool button does not show up, you might have to enable cheats. So in order to do that, you're going to bring up that text window pop-up again, Control-Shift-C, and type testing cheats on or true, either way works. Cheats are enabled, and that way you can shift click and it'll say tool. I believe that TwistedMexi has on his website where we downloaded his files, there's actually one that allows the testing cheats to always be on, so you never have to type that in, so you can always install that into your mods folder if you like as well. We're going to hit on tool. For this video we're just going to focus on rotating the object, so click rotate and you'll see this green circle has emerged. Now that's not the angle that I want to rotate. I want to rotate up and around. I'm going to make sure that I click change axis, and there's 3 different axis wheels that you can use. and then we're going to click it again, Tool, Rotate, and it should change the axis. Yeah, that's the axis that we want. And so I'm just going to type in 10, and you'll see it's moved. The next one, because we're going in increments of 10, will be 20. Rotate, 20. And so on and so forth until you get to 36. Now, if you have a brain like mine that gets really stuck as I'm counting and loses track of the numbers, something that you can do is you can split the room like so, move it over, and that way, as you're rotating them, if you lose track of the count, and you're like, oh, what's the next number I'm supposed to rotate it? You can be like, okay, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Okay, this one's supposed to be 60. And it just makes it easier to do that. Now let's try doing it with the angled room, going back into live mode. And something I forgot to mention is that when you're setting up an angled version, you want to make sure that it's facing the front in the same way that this one is facing the front. That way you can use the same axis when you're rotating, and you'll see what I mean. You're going to hold the shift, click, tool, rotate, and you'll see that it's going in the right direction. Let's do the next one, 20. And that way you'll have a wheel that goes this way on this wall, and on an angled wall it goes this way, so that it's the same kind of wheel. What happens if you accidentally turn it too far? So let's say I lost count and I accidentally turned this one to 60 instead of 30. Oh no, it's too much. That's okay, just shift click it, tool, rotate, and then put a the negative symbol in front, and then 30 because we want to move it back by 30, and then it's in the right position. So you can use negative numbers to move the object the opposite way. Instead of having you watch me rotate all 36 objects for each wall, I've already pre-rotated them and saved them as rooms in my library. And then I'll show you what you're going to do next. So you want to line these up against a wall. And something to keep in mind is that angled walls, diagonal walls, tend to stretch things out. It's a longer distance to go at a diagonal wall than it is a straight wall. And so sometimes that can shift the position of where you're going to be moving the objects, and I'll show you what I mean in a minute. So when we're creating this wheel and I'm preparing it, let's say, to make a fantasy arch, I need to decide whether I want the center of the wheel to be in between the main lines of the wall on the grid, or on the line. Now, because I'm using Realm of Magic objects and I'm later going to be turning this into an arch that goes above a 3-tile door, I'm going to make sure mine is in between the axis lines. And the best way to line it up is to take the 360-degree one that you didn't rotate, that's straight up, and move it over and make sure that it sits between those lines, and then check at the back that it's not poking through, and mine is poking through. So I'm going to pull it out just a little bit more. I hate that it flicks back like that, it jumps out of place. Okay, now look at, we're right up against the wall. When you go to do the angled version, sometimes it doesn't go right up against the wall like the straight version. So let's try it with this angled version. That was not centered. There we go. And notice how that's as close as I can get it to the wall. But that's okay, it's not that much of a distance. So there is a slight change when you're using an angled wall than a straight one. Then the next thing I want to do is try and go in order of the rows that you've rotated. It makes it a lot easier because I'm going to start to align them into that wheel, and if I just grab a random one, sometimes it's hard to know where the center is supposed to be. It's much easier to just go with the next rotated object. And I'm just going to line them. Actually, I did that. I think it goes a bit further over. There we go. I'm just going to align them on top of each other, and you'll start to notice a wheel shape forming. And the beauty of rotating objects and putting them in a wheel like this is that sometimes you can create designs that you would have never even thought that object would turn into. So this is the exciting part for me because I get to see what it's going to look like. When you're done aligning all the objects on top of each other, you will end up with two wheels. A wheel that goes against the straight wall and a wheel that goes against an angled wall. And you can leave them like this. You can make them bigger, you can make them smaller, you can elevate them, you can lower them and turn them into all kinds of objects. For example, if I wanted to make this smaller, just click on one of them, click the left bracket key and then the H key. The H key is the same as clicking on the arrow, and the reason why this is important is because if I click on an object and I shrink it, oftentimes notice how it bounced back, and then you have to try and figure out where to place it. But if you just hit the H key, it'll put it back in the same location. So you can quickly change the size by bracket H, bracket H, bracket H, and just go all the way around and make it smaller. It'll keep the center in the same location, so if you wanted it to be flush against the floor, you would have to lower it. For example, if I wanted this to be a lot lower to the floor, I would just reposition it back where it was, and then just keep hitting the 0 key until it's where I want it against the floor. Or if you want it higher, hit the 9 key to elevate it, but you will have to move each individual piece, which I know seems tedious, but once you've created these shapes, you can use them over and over and over again in lots of different kinds of builds. So now I'll show you some of the wheels I've already created and another step that you can take to make unique shapes. Okay, now I've filled this lot with lots of different wheels that I have worked on because I want to show you two more tricks that you can do to make these objects look really unique and usable in multiple different projects. And the first one is that once you've rotated an object into a wheel, you can actually reshape it into several different options. So I'll show you here, I used a ruin column from Get Together, and if you use the comma or period keys, you can rotate it even further. So you can take an object, and let's say I'm only going to rotate it once, and you have to go through each of the 36 objects. So it can be a bit time consuming, but you'll end up with multiple different versions of the same wheel. So this is the same object, just slightly rotated in different ways, and you can rotate them like this without using the tool mod because they've already been put into a circle. You're just adjusting a different axis using the comma or period key. And I'll show you some more examples of what you can do. So here is a tribal inspired wheel that's already up in my gallery, and it started off looking like this. I made it out of a base game ship decoration, and just by rotating it, going around each one, I created this kind of a shape for this one, and it's got some cool details that you can use for all kinds of builds. And then this one is my favorite because it's got this really cool wood detail on one side, and then on the other side it's got all of these ropes hanging down, and I could see this being used for a tribal build. Someone mentioned in my gallery that it would look really cool on a steampunk airship, and they also come in different colors. Most objects have multiple colors, so you can change the color to suit whatever you want. And I know that I think it was the white one or the blue one that someone mentioned that would look really cool in a sci-fi build. So you can use these for a lot of different things. You can also, instead of just changing them all in the same direction, you can get a bit unique and create, like I created a compass shape out of these knight statues simply by rotating some of them. If you see the green arrow, I rotated some of them to the right and some of them to the left, and it ended up creating this compass design. And you can use these as like backdrops for example here, I started to turn one of the wheels into a throne, like something behind a tribal type of throne, and you can come up with some really creative ways of using this. The last tip I want to show you is how to add even more into your wheel. Let's say, for example, you rotated an object like this. This is the candelabra from Realm of Magic. And let's say I don't want this many gaps between the objects. I want to use a lot more of them. What I would do is I would take my wheel that I've already saved as a room into my library, go back into live mode, and then rotate each of the objects. Shift click, rotate, make sure the axis is where I want it, which it is not. So let's change the axis for this one. Okay, and once it's on the axis I want, because I've already rotated the original wheel in 10-degree increments, to make it fit perfectly in between them, I'm going to rotate each of them by 5. So I'm not saying 5, then go to the next one and do 15 or whatever. Each one, do it by 5. So I've rotated 1. Okay, and you would just go around the whole wheel. And then I'm not going to show you all of them because that would take too long. But once you've rotated them all by 5, make sure you have another version of that original wheel that you did before you rotated it by 5. And you're just simply going to take the one room and move it right on top of the other. Now it's not going to show up the same because I only rotated a couple of them, but see how already it's filled in those gaps, and it will end up looking like this one. Let's say you want to go even crazier and fill in the gaps even more. Do the same thing again, but this time rotate each one of them by 2.5 and that will fill in that gap. So if you're really ambitious, you can end up with something that has more of a smooth feel, and that's good if you want to create a wheel for maybe a caravan or a chariot or whatever kind of thing you're building that needs to have a smooth solid wheel like this. The only thing I would keep in mind, however, is if you tend to have a slow computer, putting this many objects on one lot can bog the game down and can even make it crash. So you need to make sure that your settings in your computer can actually handle it. So here's an example of a base game object. This is the barbell. I already showed you how simply rotating it with the comma and the period key, you can create different looking wheels, but you can also twist some of them around so that they're facing different angles like I showed you with the compass, and you can make some of them slightly larger than the others and come up with all these different kinds of combinations. Here's an example of another wheel I made out of a paddle wheel boat. So sometimes objects you wouldn't think are going to look cool when you rotate them, when you do, it turns into something that you never thought would turn out, which is why I have so much fun with it. This one was a bit trickier to line up, but this is the ship decoration from Get Famous. And that has another one of those tribal type of feels. Once you've saved these wheels into your library, you've now created an object at so many different angles that you can later shape something totally different. It doesn't have to be a wheel. You can use those pieces that you've rotated and use them in a different way to create lots of different angles and lots of different shapes. I took the one way that I rotated the object, this is the ship wheel from Get Famous, and then I used the other way that I rotated it. Remember I showed you with the comma and period keys, you can change the way that they look. And one way of rotating it made it look like this, the other made it look like this. And I sized them up and placed them on top of each other, added this clock, which I think is a base game clock. I added this window from Realm of Magic. And I added a few of the ship wheels to make it look like cogs, and you've got a steampunk clock that you can put in a clock tower. So there's all kinds of things that you can create by using this method, and it's the same method for each object, you just end up with different looking things. So here's some sci-fi looking wheels, and this was made with this statue from Discover University. And I just thought it looked so cool. I mirrored it, I saved the room, and I flipped it around and put it on the back side of it, and it creates this really cool shape. And the last thing that you can do by rotating it, instead of elevating the objects up and creating a wheel this way, you can leave the objects on the ground, and even though you can use the comma and period keys to turn it around by quarters, instead line them all up like we did with the 36 elevated objects, but leave them on the ground. And then in live mode, make sure that the axis you use to rotate them is not that one. Is this way around. And do the same thing where you line up 36 objects and you rotate them in increments of 10. And then when you place them on top of each other, you can actually create columns like this. Now, as you notice, sometimes when you place objects on each other, they do cause a flickering problem. So for this area, I would try and find an object that would hide this base part of the column that flickers. But look how cool that looks with all the lights around, and it's got this neat webbed pattern. And to change this up even more, you can delete some of the pieces and come up with a new pattern. Here's an example of how I took the wheel from this tribal wheel that I made and rotated it like I would the column, sized it up. It's massive. But look how cool that roof piece is. I'm currently using this to make a tribal fort. And I just put it on the round, I don't even know what that's called. The deck pieces. I created a circle deck piece and then placed them on top and sized them. It did take a little bit of time to get the sizing right, but once you get it, you save it to your gallery and you can reuse this as many times as you want, add other objects to add more detail, and there's so many things that you can create just simply by rotating things with TwistedMexi's tool mod in a circle and then shifting them around to create the object in the style that you want. And the benefit of this is that you can save it on multiple different projects because you'll have an object already rotated. All you might have to do is tweak it slightly. So you're not spending ages creating one wheel to only use it once. One wheel can be transformed into unlimited shapes and options. And it's nice having pre-rotated objects because you never know how they'll turn out. So if you already have a bunch of these made and you're working on something, you might think, oh, the wheel I already made would look good with that. So you can layer different kinds of wheels on top of each other. I might like this as a centerpiece to place in something else. Okay, now the last thing I'll show you is how I created these angel wings by using a wheel of feathers that I already pre-rotated, and all I did was pick the angles that I wanted, sized some of them up, kept some of them smaller, because when you've already created the wheel, you just pick the angles that you really want. And this is base game, by the way. This is the quill. Oh, but that's another thing to show you. Notice how it's changed the angle, and that's because if you have an object where items lock on top, like a tabletop or like this, see, it's going to take it out of the rotation that we had it in. So one trick when you're using objects like this that have that locking position is to make sure that they're out of the way when you're building. And that way, it'll stay in the position you want until you're finished, and then you can add these kinds of items into your build. Thanks for watching this tutorial. Please leave a thumbs up if you liked the video, leave a comment and let me know if there's any specific content you want me to create, and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Thanks for your wonderful support. Love ya!